Marriage is more than constant bliss or unending sacrifice.
It's exploring your own story and seeing the other for who they are, even as they change.
It's the discovery of life in the gaps and the mysteries that emerge when we believe that fullness is possible for each other.
Marriage is choosing the other's flourishing on a daily basis to build a relationship that thrives and reflects the kingdom of God.
Choosing Us, a 4-week series on marriage that will introduce you to each of our campus pastors and their spouses,
will remind us all that we cannot do God's work in the world without being bound to one another.
We must choose one another
Again and again.
we must choose God.
Again and again.
We must learn who we are
And who the other is in our midst.
Jana, you and I first got to know each other sitting in the back row of American government class during our senior year of high school. That's a long time ago, isn't it?
Oh my word.
Yes. We were sitting in the back row because you and I were both conscientious students, and so the teacher had assigned us to sit in the back row, and you did a great job of engaging me on the stuff we were talking about in class, but then eventually you got me talking about even more than that.
I mean, as you know, you would sit in the back row and you'd have your hat pulled down and you'd say, "What'd you get on the test?"
That was smooth. That was so smooth.
So smooth. You had such good moves at that point.
So I was super awkward, and thank goodness, like I had had a little bit of experience with some female friends who I'd met maybe a year or so before getting to know you. And they taught me a little bit about how to interact with someone who's female, or maybe just a human being in general, beyond the guys that I was interacting with. I was pretty rough around the edges. I can maybe aspirationally say a diamond in the rough, but really I was just rough when I first met you.
When I first met you, I was intrigued by your sense of humor. Something that my family really values is making each other laugh. And you were funny. You didn't always show it right away, but you had this wry sense of humor that really was interesting to me.
So at some point, you and I connected beyond just American government class when I asked you out to a Christmas dance. We've got an amazing picture of us from 1996, our first time going out together. And that led to us spending more time together, eventually deciding that we were ready to be more than friends. And, thank God that God put us together in American government class and that you sort of initiated having us be more than friends.
Yeah, so I need to tell the story of how we made that transition. So as you know, we were attending this basketball game. We were sitting with a big group of friends. And our friend Ryan, he kind of looks around and he said, "So, like, what's up with you two?" And being like super smooth, we were like, we blushed and stammered and changed the subject.
We did.
And so fast forward, you were driving me home from the basketball game. And so you said, "So, what did you think about what Ryan said?"
Like I said earlier, I was very smooth back
So
then.
smooth. But then I also had such a smooth line. I said, "I'm interested if you're interested."
And thank God you took the first move, because I was too scared to do it, but you did it for us. Thank you. We're going to pause a couple times today for discussion. And the first time that we're going to pause today for discussion is you and I have been sharing memories from when we were seniors in high school. We're going to invite people to reflect back on their younger selves and to think back on what they were like when they were younger. So here's our first question for discussion. Choose a grade from school, whether that was kindergarten or 5th grade or 12th grade, some year that you remember, and describe what you were like then. Let's talk about that.
Today, we're continuing the series, Choosing Us.
We are. It's a series that's loosely based on a book of that name, Choosing Us, by Gail Song Bantam and her husband, Brian Bantam. Gail Song is a nationally known speaker. She's a lead pastor. Her husband, Brian, is a professor and he's a writer. And they have so many things to teach us about marriage. They're a fantastic, insightful couple.
At the heart of this series is a choice we all make, whether married or not. We must choose one another again and again. We must choose God again and again.
In this series, well, it's based on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. We're in a series of series, right? And we're working our way through the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' most famous teaching. And in that Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "You have heard the law that says a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice. But I say that a man who divorces his wife, unless she has been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery." In this series, Choosing Us, we're using those verses from Jesus, not necessarily to parse them out or explore every verse, but to remind us of the importance and the seriousness of marriage. At the heart of marriage is love, yes, but there's a commitment at the heart of marriage, a covenant.
A covenant is a way of being in the world that says, I choose to be who I am with you.
So in this series, we're doing sort of a tour of Sycamore Creek, where we're having each campus pastor and their spouse share a message at each of the campuses of Sycamore Creek. And today, it's our turn, Jana. Today, you and I are going to be continuing this Choosing Us series, and we're going to be using it to point us toward choosing to learn. It may be appropriate given our educational backgrounds. Choosing to learn is a really important part of choosing to be who you are with someone else.
Choosing to learn involves a realization that I will never know it all. I won't know everything about myself. I mean, some of us come close, but I won't know everything about the other person, including you.
No, you won't know everything about me.
No, you're mysterious. So I'm going to choose again and again to learn, to increase my understanding, to be open to changing my thinking, and to both learn and to relearn.
Yeah, so the first aspect of this choosing to learn is choosing to learn who you are. Now, show me someone who doesn't know who they are, and I'll show you someone who struggles to have deep, meaningful relationships. To learn about someone else helps to know who you are. Learning starts with ourselves. And it might sound counterintuitive, right? We're talking about a series, right, where we choose us, we choose each other. That you have to first start with learning about yourself. But if you're going to learn about someone else, you really have to start with knowing who you are. And it's a super helpful place to start.
We hope to give some practical tips today about choosing to learn. Our first practice that helps us to know who we are is self-reflection.
Self-reflection, okay.
Self-reflection is critical for knowing who you are. You can never take for granted that you know yourself fully. Either who you were, who you are, or who you will be.
It's hard to know who you were, to have a good, accurate picture of that. It's hard to know who you are right now, and it's hard to know who you will be. I think I would add that self-reflection is sort of risky. It's risky to ask yourself about those things. Self-reflection invites us to consider the possibility that we don't always handle things well. It is an opportunity for us to grow in the way that we respond to certain situations and to certain people. Jana, I think a lot of our disagreements, I could maybe say disagreements that we have as a couple, they're often resolved in some way through self-reflection. It's us realizing, maybe me realizing, I didn't handle that real well, and then going back to you. And when I realize that, have that self-reflection, all of a sudden we have a much better conversation and we get way more on the same page. And this is something that I really appreciate about you, that when we have disagreements, you're really good at the self-reflection and recognizing the areas where you fell short, and then coming back to me with that self-reflection and helping us to resolve the disagreement. I'm really grateful about that, about you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is not easy to self-reflect.
No.
It's so much easier to try to blame the other person or to provide rationalizations for why you were actually right and they just didn't quite understand how right you were. One of the things that we've had to guard against is that self-reflection can very easily lead to self-rationalization. It's so easy to harden the walls that protect the ideas we have about ourselves and our deepest core. I'm right. The other person is wrong.
It's so easy to fall into that trap. And self-rationalization doesn't get us where we need to go in relationships. Self-reflection is totally different than self-rationalization. And self-reflection is really similar to this Christian idea of confession. To confess it's not just creating a laundry list of like every place that you messed up or you failed. In fact, confession can have two different meanings. So first, confessing, and this is how Christians use this, confessing can be stating who God is. Confession is saying, God, you are. To confess is to recognize it or state who God is, what God is like. For instance, God is faithful. Or God is loving, or God is just, or God is patient. Those are all confessing an experience or a attribute of God. That's the first sort of definition of confession, God, you are. A second definition of confession can be stating who we are. So confession in this sense is saying, God, I am whatever. To confess is to recognize whatever state we're in, how we are like, and yes, that does include our shortcomings, but that's not it. Confession is more than that. Confession is really having a sense of who we are, recognizing both our strengths and our weaknesses, and confessing them to God or to each other. So this could be an acknowledgement like, I have a tendency to lash out in anger, or I have a tendency to be really impatient when I'm driving, or whatever it might be. Those are confessions. God, I am. So those two statements, those two confessions, God, you are, and God, I am, they relate and they interact with one another. So confession is both self-reflection, knowing who you are, and a consideration of who we are with.
And this idea of confession as relationship is critical because it allows us to enter into difficult conversations as moments of discovery about ourselves and the other person, rather than as a battle to be won.
Ooh, that's a big thing right there.
Oh man, yeah, I think we're still figuring it out. Yeah. One of the hardest things to do during conflict is to acknowledge the complexity of the other person and ourselves. When we're tired or frustrated or hurt, it's easy to ask why the other person can't just see what we see, or to question why they're not doing what we would like to be done. When disagreements are a tug of war where we can't give up ground, then we lose opportunity to discover something about the other person.
Yeah, this is, I think, particularly in conflict, choosing to learn is so important. I know that often when you and I are in conflict, I have this tendency where I want to win the conflict. You know this about me, and it drives you crazy. Maybe it's endearing at times too, but I love to be right. I just absolutely love to be right. And I've had to realize that love of being right, it is not helpful in our relationship. And it really rears its ugly head when I'm hungry or when I'm in pain. I've shared with lots of people at Sycamore Creek before that I get hungry a lot. And when I am hungry, that desire to be right or to win an argument really rears its ugly head. And sometimes it's helpful for me, like, I might need a snack, or even just recognizing like, oh, I'm hungry and I'm not being curious in this moment about you. I'm just trying to win the argument. And I have the same problem with pain. I've had knee issues for years, and I'll get real quiet and real withdrawn, but then I'll also get sort of snappy and judgmental when I'm in pain. And particularly judgmental and critical, those are not great attributes about myself. And I have to counteract against that when we are disagreeing with one another. Now, it's really important in my interactions with you that I continue to reach out and choose to learn, and that I'm not trying to win, but I'm trying to be on the same page with you.
Mark, that word critical really caught my attention. I would say that my being critical is at the heart of most of our conflict. Yeah, so here's...
I could disagree with you. I don't need to be right on this one.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Well played. So my take on our pattern is that you do something normal and human, like not hearing me because you're on your phone or because you're, answering an email or something. And I react harshly because you failed to meet my often unreasonable and unstated expectation. When I'm at my worst, I'm quick to feel slighted and to pick at you. Something you've taught me is to slow down, to stop, and to think before approaching conflict. You're so good at responding gently, even when I'm fired up.
So I have to draw attention to what we were just doing. Is we were just doing some confession with one another, some self-reflecting together and what we're like in our relationship with each other. Now, confession is not easy to do well. Confession, it takes practice. And so we're going to give us all an opportunity here to practice confession. And now confession, again, can be stating God, you are, and describing God in some way. Confession can also be saying, God, I am, and describing ourselves in some way. So as we approach this next question for discussion, we're going to invite you, it's sort of a choose your own venture. You can go two different ways with this question. You can do either type of confession and practice it. So our next question for discussion is this: share or confess who God is to you, or share or confess who you are right now. How would you describe God, or how would you describe yourself? Let's take a moment and let's talk about it. So our first aspect, Jana, of choosing to learn is learning who you are. And the practice that helps us to do that is self-reflection, or we could call that confession when we share it with others. The second aspect of choosing to learn is learning who the other person is. And again, a reminder that being in a relationship with someone else is a continual learning process.
Yeah, you and I started that learning process together as we transitioned from high school into college.
Yeah, that was a big part of it, wasn't it?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we both decided to attend Calvin College, and we were navigating so many transitions. We were leaving our families, we were moving into the dorms, living with roommates. We were changing our social situations. I mean, it was a huge transition.
It was. And things like roommates didn't always go well.
Oh my goodness. No, I went potluck and oof, that was, I learned my lesson.
It was a great fit, you and your
We were not particularly compatible. No, we were pretty different. We faced other challenges as we were navigating that transition. One of the ones that I think was big for you was actually learning how to study. That was a skill that you hadn't had to develop up until.
I had it. It's a good skill, life skill.
It was a good life skill, yeah.
Thanks for your help with that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You need some direct instruction.
Yes.
Yeah, it was fun to watch you build up that skill as a freshman in college. I think, too, we also saw what it was like to live apart from our families and to make our own decisions and have some more independence. And then also to navigate that. Like, what does that look like? That balance of like pulling together as a couple and then also forming our own identities.
Yeah, through that transition, we really learned a lot about ourselves, but also about each other. And this is where I think it's really hard to separate in relationships self-reflection from learning about the other person, because they're constantly happening simultaneously as we're in relationships with each other. And a big part of that college transition, I think, was not just, learning a bunch of facts about you, like your likes or your dislikes. It was grasping who I am and who I am in relationship with you, and like what that was going to look like for us to move forward. And again, to do that with another person, it always involves a choice to be who I am with someone else. Now, Gail Song Bantam writes about this, and she says, on this journey together, we are rediscovering our own stories and histories and tendencies. And we are also learning about this person with us in their unfolding and discovery. Now, the challenge of this learning with another person is that there's always two things that are happening at the same time with that other person. People are both static, unchanging, and they are dynamic, changing.
To learn about one another in a relationship is to realize that we all change.
We do, all the time. And
we keep changing.
Yes.
It's an ongoing process. It's never done. I think I had this idea when we were first married that, we would get married and then we would have this relationship and it would be lovely, without realizing like we had to keep evolving over time to continue to make this relationship work.
Absolutely. We had to keep talking, keep taking stock, keep asking questions. And at times that's been good, but at times it's really painful and hard to work through things together.
So difficult. Yeah. The most recent transition that we've experienced together as a couple is sending our son Drew off to Michigan Tech.
That's been a big transition.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we went from being a family of 4 who all lived together to being like a family of 3 with one member off 500 miles away. Mm-hmm. And it's been really interesting for us to navigate that transition too, and to see how our roles have shifted in this new family.
Yeah, so what have you learned about yourself or about me through that transition?
Well, I think that something that's been interesting is to see how we've had to learn how to parent differently. So we've had to learn how to give Drew his space and then also provide support in a way that feels appropriate. Something that I've loved about this transition is watching how good you are at reaching out to Drew and maintaining that long distance relationship. I think that I'm more hesitant about bothering him. I don't want to smother him or be a burden, but it's so neat to watch how you keep reaching for that connection.
Yeah, whereas I would say you're probably a little bit more better at expressing your emotions. That's generally not, I don't have a lot of big feelings. And so you've been great about expressing emotion in the midst of Drew moving out of the house and being 500 miles away. Now, that's been a big transition for us, and it comes as this summer we're going to be celebrating our 25th anniversary. Happy anniversary to you and I. That's a pretty big milestone. And as we approach that, I think back to when we first started our relationship. And I think when we first started our relationship, we expected to change. We expected to have milestones, like moving different places, getting different careers, having kids. But I think at some point you begin to think you want the person to just be who they are, and you forget that you continue to change. And so it's really hard in a relationship with someone else to still learn from the other person and to still expect change 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years into a relationship. As we get older, it's really easy to fall into ruts, sort of in terms of habits or thinking about the other person. It's really easy to see who a person has been, but it's much harder to see who they are right now, or maybe even harder to see who they could be in the future if you've got all this history behind you influencing those things.
To review, our practice for learning more about ourselves is self-reflection.
Yes, it is. And now our practice for learning more about the other person is vulnerable sharing. Vulnerable sharing.
Vulnerable sharing is hard to do.
It is.
It involves taking those parts of yourselves that you've discovered and then choosing to share them with your partner, with your person. This is the with another person part of the practice of confession. It takes courage and the trust developed over time to share those parts of yourself. Like many things in life, we're not good at this. I am not good at this. And it takes practice.
It does take practice. And I think we're both learning and growing in this skill of vulnerable sharing. And so with practice in mind, I'm going to have us engage with some vulnerable sharing and exercise from Choosing to Learn, from the book Choosing Us. And it's going to help us, I think, with who we are and with who the other person is. So as we answer these questions, I'm going to invite everyone else at home to answer these questions as well and think about their answers. So the first question is this: recall a memory that is typical of your relationship growing up. How did you engage with parents, siblings, extended family, neighbors, and so on? What were those relationships like? And these could be things like they were gregarious or subdued or fun-loving or maybe even abusive or strict. Or, there's a lot of different descriptions, right, that we could have for these relationships. And I'll go first to set the tone. A reminder for everyone at home that as you and I share, we are sharing for an audience today. And vulnerable sharing in front of an audience is probably going to look a little different for you and I than if it was really just the two of us sitting on our couch at home. So one memory that I have is of when I was growing up, I got a brand new BMX bike. And that BMX bike was awesome. Like it had the where you could pull the pedals back and brake, but then it also had a rear brake on the handle, on the left handlebar. And let me tell you, I could do some amazing skid stops with that handlebar. Well, one day I was out riding my BMX bike and I didn't look carefully before crossing the street, and I went right in front of a car and I got hit by a car. And immediately the driver stopped the car, got out, like making sure I was okay. I wasn't seriously hurt. I had some scrapes and bruises and stuff, but I knew immediately it was my fault. Like this was not the driver or the car's fault. It was my fault. And I can still remember apologizing profusely to the driver of that car while I kept on glancing up to see if my mom was looking from our house to see. And I never told my mom what happened, never confessed to my family. And I think I learned from a young age that there were, like, mistakes weren't something that you always tried to admit. Like, you tried to cover stuff up like that if you could. And, maybe in sharing this story right now, my mom's finding out for the first time about the bike accident that I got into.
Yeah, sorry, Mom. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story. It's so you to not want to let the people who care about you that you're hurt.
Yeah.
Know that you're hurt. Oh, man.
How about you? What's your childhood experience?
So one memory I have is when I was working on a research paper in 6th grade. The topic, pandas.
Ooh, a little inside joke.
A little
there.
inside
Thanks
joke.
for
It's a
throwing that
story
at me.
for another day. Yeah. Something I loved about that process was going to the library and looking at the card catalog. And I pulled all these books and I had all these note cards and I arranged the information. And I was finishing typing that up the night before it was due. And I brought it to my parents. I was so proud. I think I wanted them to say, wow, this is amazing. And I don't think I was clear in what I was looking for because they offered quite a bit of constructive feedback on that paper. And that was not what I had hoped to receive from them in that moment. But obviously I didn't ask. I didn't know what I was really looking for until I didn't get it. And then, man, I was so upset. I was ashamed and I was embarrassed that I had shown them work that just wasn't the best. Like, it wasn't good enough. It wasn't everything that I thought it could be.
This sounds like you maybe wrestle a little bit with mistakes and not having something that was perfect right away.
Absolutely.
As I'm thinking about it, like, this vulnerable sharing stuff, it's hard, but it's really important. And our memories help us to understand one another when we're able to vulnerably share those memories. And those memories often impact why we do certain things today in our relationships. And we started with vulnerable sharing of our memories and experiences because they shape our ways of doing. Our ways of doing today are often a reaction, good or bad, to things and experiences that we've had in our past. And so to get at our ways of doing, I have another set of questions for us. And these questions are, how or in what ways do you replicate this behavior today? Or how have you been formed by it? And as I think back on that bike experience that I shared and wanting to hide getting hit by a car, I still have this tendency today to want to hide or to cover up mistakes. And it's one of the things I'm really grateful for in my relationship with you, Jana, is that you encourage me to admit mistakes. And in fact, you celebrate when I admit mistakes. Now, I'm not saying that you celebrate the mistake, but you celebrate when I admit a mistake. And it's helping me to overcome that tendency that I have from the environment that I grew up in.
25 years later, I am still learning that none of us are perfect and that everyone makes mistakes.
We all do. Yep.
Oh man, we've worked so hard in our family to set a pattern where people can be themselves and can give it a good shot, but that they don't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be flawless in order to be good enough.
So we have done some vulnerable sharing, and we want to give you an opportunity to do this as well, to wrestle with these questions yourself. So we have our next question for discussion, which is sort of modified for the time we have for a discussion question. What's one connection that you have noticed, good or bad, between an experience in the past and a particular way you act today? Let's take a moment and let's talk about that.
Who we are now and who we have been formed to be is formed through many influences in our lives.
Yeah.
We have positive experiences, we have negative experiences. We also have ways that we are intentionally or unintentionally pushing back against our experiences or resisting some of those patterns that we see in our own family and our own relationship. Choosing to learn about ourselves and another person is never just about the knowledge. It's about a relationship based on how we treat one another. In order
That's super important.
I know. And we have to keep choosing over and over.
Mm-hmm.
In order to really choose someone else, learning about them can't just be gaining like knowledge about, like you said at first.
A bunch of facts or something.
Yeah, like favorite color, favorite sports team. Yeah, exactly. It's also about our actions and advocacy on behalf of the other person. learning about the other person is learning how to love them well. We love people not just in their strengths, but also in their weaknesses.
We do.
And their shortcomings.
Yeah.
And their hurts.
All the real stuff of life.
Oh, man. Yeah. All of this learning creates empathy for the person that we are connected to. Thus, learning about each other and gaining empathy is crucial to healthy relationships because empathy leads to different decisions.
That's a great point, Gina. Choosing to learn the stuff we're talking about today, it isn't just about self-realization or knowledge, even knowledge about someone else. It's about adjusting and learning with someone else together. And this is the with another person part that's crucial to life, and it's crucial to what we've been talking about throughout the series, Choosing Us. We're transformed ourselves when we learn about another person. And the transformation isn't just for us as individuals. It isn't even just for that individual relationship. It's for the greater good. Like we are transformed by interaction with other people. When I understand you, Jana, and I understand you better, it changes the way that I behave with you. It changes the way that I interact with you. It's not just information that I get about you. When you vulnerably share with me and when you self-disclose, it changes our relationship. In particular, like when I hear about your work experiences and I hear about some of the men you work with can be jerks at times, it produces empathy and support for me where I want to advocate on your behalf. Like I want to hear more about what's going on. Sometimes I get angry on your behalf and want to act. Again, empathy leads to different decisions.
Choosing to learn is an ongoing process. It's never finished. It involves,
never finished.
I know, and it involves choosing to learn who you are and who the other person is. There are a number of things we could do to work on choosing to learn. A next step in learning about yourself and others could involve counseling, which is always a good step.
That is always a good step.
Yeah, as a psychologist, I'm in favor of that option.
Very good.
A good counselor or therapist is going to help you better know yourself and better know your partner and how you relate to other people. Going back to early in our relationship story, I remember when we were choosing to get married after a couple of years of dating. Mm-hmm. And there's a verse that we chose to center our wedding on. It's Joshua 24, verse 15. It's a verse about choice. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.
But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. We have those verses in our living room behind us on the wall. And I can still remember that at our wedding ceremony, I gave maybe what was my first sermon or message when I talked a little bit about those verses and what they meant to us. And I was not that nervous about us getting married, but I was so nervous about talking about those verses in front of everyone that we knew. At the time, I hated public speaking. But as I was reflecting on those verses in this message, we chose those verses because we realized 25 years ago that if we were going to move forward together, that there were two choices that we were going to have to make in that moment. We were choosing one another again and again, and we were choosing God again and again.
I'm excited to move forward into our future together as we live out that commitment we made to God and to each other, which will involve choosing to learn who we are and who the other person is.
Let's do it. Amen.
Amen.
That's it. We're done. Ugh. You did great. Good job.
Thank you.